was about to say, come on, YouTube. YouTube is letting me down. It's been a bit slow, but just I was thinking that it loaded, thankfully. But anyway, it's your boy MKSA back with another video. And welcome to the third and penultimate part of my dreams, I suppose you could say, for supporting Celtic to become super successful, even more successful, and or continue to be as successful as possible. Hopefully to become, maybe even to become the most successful domestic side in the world. At the moment we are second. I don't know if we can catch Al Ali because they've won a heck of a lot of trophies, quite a few more than us, but although we've won a lot, like 120 I think it is. Sadly we lost 2 finals, so it would have been 122. Bit annoying. I was hoping that would push, as I said in part 2, I was hoping that would push the club to go out and buy 2 really world-class strikers. We need to buy world-class players if we're going to be even more successful, I think, and maybe even compete in Europe in the future, like win trophies in Europe again. I'd love to see Celtic win. If there was only a way that we could be dropped into like the Conference League and then win that, and then the Europa League, and maybe even one day, maybe even the Champions League, World Cup, Super Cup, and that kind of thing. Yeah, any Celtic supporters, please let me know what you think. Hopefully you won't be too harsh. All views welcome, even fans for other teams, supporters of other teams, or even people who are not into footy or soccer or whatever. Anyone who wants to ask questions. But again, hope you'll keep your comments polite and civil. But I appreciate your likes, sharing the video, your views as in viewership, as in watching the videos, and also your views as in your opinions and that kind of thing. As ever, these are pointers number 21 to 30. It's already midnight in the UK, and it's sort of supposed to be, I think we're supposed to be in spring now. I get the seasons mixed up, but I still feel really cold. I don't know if it's me that's really cold. My back, because it's cold. Like sometimes my family has to say, well, you can't wear that many layers in this weather. But anyway, these are pointers number 21 to 30. As I say, I was wondering whether to have another cup of tea, and I thought I just would. I hope I remember to put decaf. So late. I'm sure it was. But it's probably for the best. I didn't use my big mug because it's really late. My big Sports Direct mug. But anyway, so here goes. So point number 21. I'd love to. I know I normally say point number 21. I think of like history, and I would love to. History. Story. But honestly, I'd love to for Celtic to talk about its history and promote the club around the world, and for people to learn about its history, especially the more positive sides of its history, of course. I've got to admit, not all of it has been positive, but I think quite a lot of it, I would like to think, has been quite positive for the city of Glasgow and for Britain, maybe even, and certainly for Ireland, hopefully, and for the world even. Obviously, our rivals were probably in the history. Look at how far the club's come and what it can learn from history as well. As a club, I talk about like learning from other clubs, learning from its own mistakes and successes, what hasn't worked and what has worked for itself and for other clubs and that kind of thing. Moving on to point number 22, looking into the future, what the club can do. Again, it's a difficult one because I think, for me anyway, I think when you talk about the club buying better players, it feels like, how do you say that without offending the players you already have? I mean, there are players at the club which many think are not good enough to be there. And I think I meant to say in part 2, but I forgot it, which is that a lot of supporters say there's certain players there that are not good enough, and football is quite objective, like many things in life, like politics and other things. So in some ways it is a matter of opinion. You would think like the stats and all that kind of thing show a certain picture, but there are certain players who are popular amongst some and not necessarily amongst others. I think like James Forrest has been a really good player. Some say a loyal servant, but I don't know if I want to use that term servant, but whatever term you want to use, he's been a great player for us. But I do wonder if, I don't know how old he is now, but he's been at the club for such a long time that maybe some players who are a bit younger could, should step in, and to rely on players who are getting older is not, as some would say, it's not good enough, and the investment and that kind of thing has not been good enough, arguably, for a lot of supporters. I think Kelechi is really good for his age, but he is getting on a bit, and he's not always reliable and a bit injury prone. Similar with they call him the Oxlade-Chamberlain, so and players like that. So I'd love to know from Celtic Sports who would you like to see the club sign? Whether that's in a goalkeeper position, a defensive position, midfield position, or up front. I mean, Schmeichel, I really like Kasper Schmeichel, but I do think that it's kind of foolish, even as well as selfish, that he carried on playing with a shoulder injury. Surely that's going to make it worse. Surely he should have said, as well as the physios, like some people would say, I don't understand why he wanted to play. I don't know why he didn't say, no, I've got this injury. I need to take a break. Partly for his own good as well as the club's good. So I'm not sure why he played through injury when we could have used a different keeper. Luckily, the club has a good goalkeeper in Sinner, so as they say, however you pronounce his name. But yeah, I'd love to know. I mean, for instance, maybe having a sub goalkeeper in case, heaven forbid, Sinner Silo gets injured. It's looking like Kasper Schmeichel's going to be too old, like for his age as well. The fact that he's got an injury, that could be at the end of his career, or have to go to a lower level. But the club shouldn't be relying on older players too much. I know that having experience is good, having a balance between experience and youth, which I talked about in the past, including in part 2 and point number 20, towards the end of the video. But yeah, look at who we could sign, sub goalkeeper. We might even need like 2 or 3 goalkeepers just in case there's injuries and all that kind of thing. I mean, maybe we've already got those, I don't know. But again, some players might say, oh, the goalkeeper position's all right, but we need an extra striker in case someone gets injured or whatever. They're a bit injury prone, they get on a bit or whatever, or Antwerp, or they're a bit injury prone, or whatever it might be. But look at who we can sign, as or whatever positions. I'd love to know from Celtic Sports. Say different supporters have got different views, but I'd say I was hoping that the defeats in the last 2 finals would mean that the club would go out and spend money and buy to at least a couple of good players. And again, I don't want to insult the players that are there in many cases, especially the ones putting effort in. Maeda is really good on his day, but they say he what's the word, threw his dummy out the pram or whatever, his dummy out, because he didn't get his way when he wanted to be sold, and he's only playing well now because he wants to move on. Antwerp will get to World Cup with Japan or whatever, which is a shame if the players aren't putting 100% effort, even if they're really good quality, they might need to be sold on. So again, look at who the club could buy. Look at getting a striker from a naive point of view. And as I say in Scotland, I got slagged for saying this, but having GoFundMes or crowdfunding, or even the supporters just generally saying putting money into to help the club buy players. Maybe it could be something like enough supporters do that and put money together. But maybe I'm being naive, as ever. I'd love to know. I hope people won't be too harsh. People have been harsh in the past about my opinion, especially about my punctuation and about some of my ideas about crowdfunding and GoFundMe and all that kind of thing. So I'm probably foolish to repeat those. But anyway, moving on that note, number 23, talking about investment and money and all that kind of thing. I would love for the club, and again, I know I mentioned this point a few times in the past, but I'd love for the club to have as much investment, sponsorship, and general funding and money as possible. As long as it's legal. So, and I think, with it, well, I know with the town football and with Celtic, I'd love to see both clubs, both the town football generally and Celtic, working with FIFA and UEFA to make sure we don't fall foul of any rules, any rule violations. I mean, in England, you get PSR, I can't remember what that stands for, but something like sustainable responsibility. But maybe Scotland could do something to help their clubs get more funding. As long as I suppose they do it within FIFA and UEFA's rules. So I'd love for the club to get, just like I'd love for Italian teams to, I'd love for the club to get as much funding as possible, again, as long as it's legal. Any legal source of funding, money coming into the club, whether that's through investment, sponsorship, or even donations, or whatever it might be. And maybe the club could work with FIFA and UEFA, as I say, to say how much can the club get in terms of investment and that kind of thing, as long, and how can the club avoid falling foul of any rules. I suppose the reason why I mention investment and sponsorship in many ways and how I think it fits with success, being world class and successful, I suppose, goes in hand in glove. But it's because money, whether people like it or not, money is something that's big in football. I love it, but a lot of supporters, especially Celtic supporters, probably really dislike or even hate the fact that money is a big part of it, because they say for whatever reason that it's a shame, like they say money's king again, whatever. But yeah, I love to see like transfers and things like, especially if it's for my favourite clubs, hopefully. And I think a big thing I talk about, like, asking questions to Celtic sports, and one of the things is that I think Celtic sports have to make a decision. And the saying is, I suppose, you can't have your cake and eat it. But I don't know why you'd have a cake if you can't eat it. But do the sports want to see the clubs competing in Europe and having loads of ambition, or are they happy to see them in sort of Scottish football? And many supporters want to see the club do well in Europe. But if those are the same supporters who are saying, in many cases, or if not, in most cases, or whatever, that I imagine some of them are not, that's saying that we don't want wealthy investors, then I think, like, how do you get that? How do you do that? Like, all the clubs that do well in Europe have a lot of money. Although I'm not too bothered about Europe for Celtic, because I think that, I mean, some say it shows a lack of ambition, but I'm about winning more trophies and having that level of success. Like, even when our rivals, the Rankers, went all the way to the final in the Europa League, I don't think you'll think back to that. Well, I'm not mentioning it now, but a lot of time you won't think, oh no, remember that year when they went all the way to the final? We'll be like, yeah, but we still won the league. And you'll still remember those things. So different Celtic sports obviously might have different views on that. Some might say the best seasons were when we did well in Europe and all that kind of thing. But if I felt Celtic could win a trophy in Europe, then maybe a bit of a dilemma, because I want to see Italian teams do well in Europe. So that affects me more in terms of seeing them do well in Europe. I'd be happy to see Celtic to dominate domestically, and then after a while, maybe then get the funding to do well in Europe. But if we can't win a trophy in Europe, I don't see the point of like getting to the quarterfinals and semi-finals or even the final just to be there. But if you disagree, any Celtic supporters, please let me know out there. But also think about, I normally think for point number 23, I think of like fundraising, investment, sponsorship, and things about money, but also about the charitable work and the foundation. And hopefully more people will fall in love with the club due to the good work it does, which I hope makes a genuinely positive difference in Scotland and even across the UK and around the world, especially in developing nations. I hope the more money the club gets, the more the club can give to good causes in Mali, South Africa, Kenya, and all across Africa and Asia, helping like tech projects and things like that. I'd love to see the clubs give more to those things, and maybe like give away, if we get loads of investment, maybe give away 10% of the money to good causes. Also, any prize money we get, and hopefully, I talk about like sponsors matching what we give to charity, so as many sponsors as possible. But again, part of working with FIFA and UEFA could be if we as a club give away so much money to good causes and promote the image of the beautiful game and make sure it's a beautiful game, keep the beautiful game beautiful, discourage hooliganism. I know you can't control all the supporters, but the club itself could discourage hooliganism, give a lot to charity, promote equality, do everything legal, and make sure they try and tackle corruption and help FIFA and UEFA to tackle corruption within the game and that kind of thing. Hopefully FIFA and UEFA could even help with investment and sponsorship themselves into the club, just like I love them to with the town teams, for the same sort of deal. I mentioned like probably 80 or 90% of the ideas I have for Italian football could be applied for Celtic and vice versa. But yeah, also they could help the club and enable the club to. Maybe that could be a bypass for FFP rules. Maybe like they could be, the more money you give to charity, the more you do for good, the more money you're enabled to have from investors and sponsors. And if there's multiple investors and sponsors, I think part of the argument is like what happened to Leeds and Portsmouth. I think in the past where investors pulled out, or with Leicester at the moment. Like, if something goes wrong, unfortunately with Leicester with the helicopter crash that happened, I'm sure most people know about that, but especially those who are into footy, it seems to have set the club back arguably. I don't know if that would have happened either way, but it seems like that triggered the problems. Maybe they were coming anyway. I don't know. Maybe the problems that the company has that runs Leicester, but the idea is that investors can't just invest and then pull out, or whatever happens, and then the club has problems. So it has to be sustainable. But if there's multiple investors and sponsors, then hopefully that will mean the club will be able to say this. Even if some pull out, whatever it is, hopefully they won't. Heaven forbid they pull out, but the club will still have that investment. But again, maybe I'm being naive. I know it's a mad idea about crowdfunding, GoFundMe pages, maybe doing things like sponsored walks, sponsored car washes, and all sorts of different things to raise money for the foundation and for the club itself. I also hope the club will do lots of good things for animals, disabled people, and other vulnerable and disadvantaged people. Football for Good, sure it does, but like helping, working with politicians to have more pitches for younger people to keep them out of trouble and that kind of thing. Number 24, as on that note, I'm working with like Celtic and Gaelic political parties, being the flag carrier, as I talked about before, for Celtic countries, the 8 Celtic countries or whatever, and Celtic people around the world, Celts all around the world. And also, I'd love to see the club, talking about around the world, I'd love to see the club being supported all around the world. Maybe supporting countries that were colonised on their independence days as well, which hopefully will. And while the club helps those people and those nations, it would also be rewarded for doing so, hopefully, by having more sports and academies. It will improve the image of the club even more, and hopefully more people can learn about the club. I'd love to share ideas and listen to and read ideas, and people share ideas about how to get the club better marketed around the world, to have more sports across Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and around the world, Australasia, and basically the 4 corners of the world and that kind of thing. But yeah, maybe on the club's website, I think it already does things like this, like Chinese New Year, and that kind of thing. It could celebrate India's Independence Day, islands, special days and occasions, like St. Patrick's Day, of course, which it does already, but I guess they do have videos on that, but maybe even other nations as well, on their Independence Days and that kind of thing. I think that goes like 24 hours in a day. For some reason, that reminds me of Independence Days and things like that, and that kind of thing. Maybe it could even have videos on, let's say, India's struggle for independence and that kind of thing. But yeah, working also with local, regional, and national politicians, the SNP, and even like rival political parties could compete to see which will sponsor the club the most. But I'd love for the club especially to work with Celtic and Gaelic political parties. Number 25, also for Republicans around the world, people who support republics, to support the club. A bit of a dilemma though, because I'd love for the club, as I say, to have investment from all different countries, different nations. And there's something I forgot to say as well, which is I'd love for, like, there's Visit Rwanda has a partnership with the club I do not like very much, which is Arsenal. But I'd love for Visit Rwanda to have to sponsor like Roma and Celtic and have like Visit Rwanda. Also, I'd love for other countries like Uganda, even maybe China, Malaysia, and others to make their own shirts and maybe specially design them for Celtic, which could feature like Visit Celtic and maybe be sponsored, maybe like have 25, 30 million or whatever from different nations and that kind of thing. Different sponsorship deals, which would hopefully put even more millions into the club to buy even better players. I mentioned I put 24, but I forgot. Or I could have said I put 24, give my parents. Could have, should have, would have. Anyway, moving on to number 26. I'd love for anti-imperialists to support the club. In fact, that's the reason why I support them as an anti-imperialist. Which is a bit of a contradiction with why I support town football, town soccer, whatever you want to call it, because I joke about being mixed race, like I'm mixed up. Even though I'm an anti-imperialist, I still support town football, but I support Celtic because I'm an anti-imperialist. I support town football in spite of the fact that they are imperialists or whatever. But so yeah, anti-imperialists around the world. I mentioned before, I try and be neutral. I don't want to offend anyone, but I try and be neutral between Israel and Palestine. But the club itself does support Palestine as well as countries that are colonized in many cases. So I think maybe there's something they could use that for marketing, although I suppose it won't be popular with the other side of the argument. But or maybe even say, as a club, maybe say we're against anti-Semitism, but we're also against Islamophobia. So we're against both sides of it, or any sort of both sides of prejudice, or against all forms of prejudice. Again, I'm going to be really naive there, but number 27. I hope the club will be rewarded again. So for all the charitable work it does and that kind of thing. So I talked about like in the past they had matched the fine for Palestine. So when the club was fined flying Palestinian flags in Israel in a game in Israel, controversial sort of thing. They ran some sort of campaign to match what they were fined and then raise it for Palestinian charities. But I think this probably led me to this idea, if I remember why. That's probably the reason why I came up with this idea. But I thought match the charitable giving. So if the club, let's say, wins 100 million in prize money over time, let's say, and gives that 100 million towards things like helping to buy computers for people in Africa, PCs, laptops, and that kind of thing, tech development for Africa, STEM for Africa, or whatever, or projects helping startups and SMEs in Asia, or whatever it might be. But yeah, whatever the club gives away to charity, even like animal rights or charitable stuff, helping the homeless, whether locally, nationally, internationally, whatever, and that kind of thing, doing projects in Ireland and that kind of thing. It would be cool to get as many sponsors as possible to match that. So the more we give away to charity, the more hopefully we'll get. So if we had 100 sponsors, and again, I did talk about this idea a while back, but if we have, I hope this makes sense. If you have any questions, by the way, but or any thoughts on this, but again, hope you won't be too harsh. But if we gave away as a club like 100 million, as I say, to whatever good causes, and maybe people could help to pick those good causes, worthy causes, and that kind of thing, to see how that money can be best spent on helping people and animals and nature, whatever, even like planting trees, looking after the ocean, or whatever it might be. I'm not sure how that money could go to helping animals, but maybe there's some things people could suggest, ideas to help, or like helping scientists in developing countries, again, STEM for developing nations, that kind of thing. If we had 100 sponsors, let's say, that's come to my mind, but if we had 100 and we gave away 100 million, then we would have 100 times 100 million, which is about 10 billion, which would be massive. And again, hopefully having the deals with FIFA and UEFA to be able to give, they would reward us for doing lots of good stuff to promote the image of the people game and have academies around the world and that kind of thing. And maybe some of that money could go towards youth development academies and that kind of thing, including in developing nations and that kind of thing. But yeah, being rewarded. So the more sponsors we have and the more we give away, the more we would make. A bit like biblical teaching, I think the more you give, I think it's probably even in Islam, like the more you give, the more you get. So again, if we had 100 sponsors who match, let's say if we gave away 100 million to charity, we would have 100 million times 100, which again I think is about 10 billion. If we had 1,000, we would have about 100 billion. But I'm probably getting carried away. But yeah, the more money. Now some people might say, "Oh, it's a waste of money to give a football club that much money," but if 10% of that went towards good causes, like helping develop football in developing nations, helping younger people in developing nations to have opportunities to get good education, get football, set up their own businesses and things like that, the more money the club makes, the more, again, I love sitting up with it tangible, the more the club can help others. I hope that makes sense. Number 28, I hope the club can turn negatives into positives. Again, losing those two finals, it's hard to see to put a positive spin on it, but I would have still rather have won those finals, of course, and still reinvested. But sometimes it can lead to complacency. So I'm hoping they can turn that situation around and say, like, I was hoping before that I posted on the club's official YouTube channel that I hope that will push the club to buy 2 new strikers or whatever. But again, I'd love to know from Celtic supporters, if you listen to me, Waffle, this much, I appreciate it. Where would you like to see the club strengthen? Who would you sign if the club could sign any players? And maybe you could have an ideal version, like, yeah, I'd love for us to sign Mbappe, but in reality, we are more shopping in a different region, so we wouldn't be able to get a player like that. Or Lamine Yamal or someone like that, but we wouldn't be able to afford a player like that. But That's who I'd love ideally, and more realistically, we could get. Um, I can't think of a player on the top of my head, but more realistically, we could get such and such a player like Scott McTominay or something like that. Maybe not even someone like that, or maybe if we can raise enough funds. But again, if we get enough funds, we can get so many great players. Number 29, I love for POC, people of colour, and mixed race people, as they talk about supporting the club and bringing the club around the world, see what they can do for the club. And I know I do repeat myself a lot, but please forgive me, but atypical, autistic, ADHD, and people with related conditions like dyslexia, and that kind of thing. And even people with mental health problems, seeing what they can do for the club. So, like, a method to madness. I'd love to go and travel to Celtic and work with the club on like ideas, coaching, strategies, and things like that. And my fellow mentally ill people and atypical people and other POC mixed race people and whatnot. And number 30, I'd love to know from I'd love to know from out there. I'd love to know from Celtic supporters around the world. Again, what you think could improve the club. And on that note, I'm out and peace love.